Praise Yah for a blessed day, everybody. And we're going to continue reading the Torah reading this day. The Torah reading for this coming Shabbat is 37:1 to 40:23. And we looked at 38 yesterday. What a powerful chapter as we took a break here from the story of Joseph to look at the wicked line of Judah, but the blessing that comes out of Judah. And may that be an encouragement of all of you to see, no matter how vile your past might be in your own life and your descendants' life, Yahweh can have a great thing for you if you just get right with him. And it was a eye-opening, powerful chapter to see about Judah, the descendants of where Yeshua, the line Yeshua came out of. But before we read 38, we were at 37, the story of Joseph. And we saw Jacob mourning for his son, Joseph, who was sold into slavery. And we ended off here in verse 36 of chapter 37. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt, to Potiphar, a eunuch of Pharaoh, the chief of the executioners. So now, before we continue the story of Joseph in chapter 39, let's not negate that because it's so important. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt, to Potiphar. So note who he's selling him to Potiphar, and then a eunuch. Now, why would, and it says a eunuch of Pharaoh, the chief of the executioners. So look at who this man is. First of all, why is he a eunuch? Well, as we discussed, it was a common practice for the king of Egypt to have all the males that were close to him in office castrated, so they would not produce a son that would overthrow the king. And this was a common thing back then. And then he was also the chief of the executioners. And of all the places for Joseph to be sold to is this man's house. And Yahweh knew exactly what he was doing when he put this man in this house. So this was a man, a powerful man who had a powerful position. And now we come up here to 39. Now Joseph was just a 17-year-old innocent boy, and just sold into slavery, not knowing what to expect. But Joseph was also a blessed man of Yahweh at this point already, with already having some dreams and getting the favor of Israel, his father. So Joseph wasn't just a normal average person. Not only was he blessed in his dreams and his vision, and his faith, but also in his physical appearance, he was blessed as well. At 17, he was supposedly a very attractive and well-built young man. And in 39, it says, and Joseph was carried down to Egypt, and Potiphar, a eunuch of Pharaoh, the chief of the executioners, an Egyptian man, bought him from the hand of the Ishmaelites, who had carried him down there. So we're going to go look back again at chapter 37 and look at what it says in verse 36. It says, and the Midianites sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, a eunuch of Pharaoh, the chief of the executioners. But then here in verse 1 of chapter 39, it says, an Egyptian man bought him from the hand of the Ishmaelites, who had carried him down there. Was it the Midianites or the Ishmaelites? How many of you caught that? Some of you might think, well, there's an error in my scriptures because it says Midianites, then it says Ishmaelites. Just like when Joseph was in the pit, the Ishmaelites first appeared, but then he sold them to the Midianites. And now we see the Midianites selling him to Potiphar, but it's the Ishmaelites. Well, it's not an error. The Ishmaelites and the Midianites were traveling together. There weren't that many of them at that time. And if we looked at where they came from with the Ishmaelites and the Midianites and the descendants, coming down from Ishmael, and we look at the descendant line of these that come from Esau and just coming down from the line, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites were one in terms of them traveling together and doing business like this together. And again, there weren't many of them at that time. So they both together sold Joseph. So this is right here in the beginning. And Joseph was carried down to Egypt, and Potiphar, a eunuch of Pharaoh, remember, the chief of the executioners. We're picking up the story right where we left off in chapter 37. Bought him from the hand of the Ishmaelites who had carried him down there. And we're going to look at Joseph and look at the common things he has with another man in scripture, Yahshua, a Messiah. And probably more than anyone else in scripture, some people would call on other people, but Joseph and the story of Joseph and probably resembles the life of Yeshua more than anyone else as we look at here the original covenant. And verse 2, we see something very powerful. And Yahweh was with Joseph. And Yahweh was with Joseph. Now, when we hear Yahweh was with Joseph, can we say that Yahweh was not with his other brothers? And how do we know if Yahweh's with us? And it comes down to the fruit of our walk. And the same thing for you, the fruit of your walk. And Yahweh talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Regardless of what's going on around us, the peace and the love and the faith and all the fruits of the Spirit that Joseph had, that his brothers did not have. Yahweh was with Joseph. So they're making it clear here before anything. Yahweh was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. So we look at the word prosperous man here. And prosperous, I would say it could be also a word, a fruitful man. He was very fruitful. Because we look at the word prosperous and we think rich, we think having a lot of stuff. But I would say he has a lot of fruit. He was a fruitful man. And he was in the house of the Egyptian, his master. So Yahweh was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of the Egyptian, his master. So it's explaining the scenery here, who he was and where he was. And his master saw that Yahweh was with him. So, do people in your life see Yahweh with you through the fruits that you exemplify in the way you carry yourself? Here you saw this man who had a normal daily practice of buying slaves, taking this slave into his house, and he saw that Yahweh was with him. Now, did he see that before he bought him, or did he see that after he bought him? It says Joseph was prospering in his hand, everything which he did. So as a result of that, that's how he realized Yahweh's with this young man. And Joseph found, verse 4, and Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. And served him. So I want to look at this word and served him and look at the idea of submission. So here you have Yahweh being with Joseph, who was prosperous. He was in the house of an Egyptian, somebody who didn't believe in Yahweh. But it says here Joseph found favor in this man's sight because everything turned out prosperous. But Joseph didn't do things his own way. It says here, and served him. Joseph was serving this non-believer because that was the role which Yahweh put him at that time, to serve a non-believer. Now, I think if this non-believer asked Joseph to do something that might not have went wrong with the Torah, I don't think he would have come up against that at that moment. His job was to serve this man and to be an example of a servant, to serve him. The man who he was serving was responsible. The master was responsible for what he told Joseph to do. It was Joseph's job and Joseph's position to serve the man. And in doing so, the man got great favor Joseph got great favor in Potiphar's eyes. And it says, and he appointed him over his house, and he gave all that he owned into his hand. Now, I want to say two things here. The first thing is, this is a great example about Yahweh the Father and Yahweh the Son. Regardless how a man feels, Yahweh the Father and Yahweh the Son, Yeshua, the salvation part of Yahweh, served Yahweh, and got great favor. And was looked upon. Yahweh was with him, and people that believed in Yahweh knew that. But we could take this down to the marriage, and take this down to the husband and wife, and look at the terms when Sarah called her husband master, and she served him, and she was prosperous in Yahweh blessing her with her child. And we see here prosperous Joseph, who submitted and served, and he got favor, and the man found favor in Joseph. Yahweh's given us these roles to fill in our lives that might not always be the role we want to live. But we need to take an example here from Joseph. And it came about from that time, he appointed him over his house and over all he owned. Yahweh blessed the Egyptian's house because Joseph's sake. Yahweh blessed the Egyptian's house. Now, this Egyptian house might have had foreign idols in there, might have had things that weren't righteous in there, but because of the light of Joseph, Yahweh had blessed this house. The blessing on Yahweh was on all that he had, the house and in the field. And this goes on to show you the extent of Yahweh's blessings to those that are righteous to him. And I will say this again. Yahweh is contagious. The blessings of Yahweh are contagious, and the sins or the curses of sin are contagious. We must run away from sin and run to righteousness. And he left all he owned in Joseph's hands, and he did not know anything that he had except the bread which he was eating. And Joseph was beautiful in form and beautiful in appearance. So this man trusted Joseph, and as long as this man had bread to eat, and it's very interesting they talk about bread here. As long as they have bread to eat, everything else was up to Joseph. And Joseph says here was beautiful in form and beautiful in appearance. And the appearance that he had at that point was most likely the appearance who he was serving. Potiphar wanted his servants probably to look a certain way, and this was his appearance. It says, and after these things, it happened that the master's wife lifted up her eyes to Joseph and said, "Lie with me." Now we see the enemy trying to destroy Joseph. Remember, we saw Yahweh telling Adam the rules of the garden and what tree not to eat of. But then Eve deceived Adam to not listen to Yahweh. To not listen to Yahweh. Well, here we find Joseph in a similar position. And it says, and these things had happened, that the master's wife lifted up her eyes to Joseph and said, "Lie with me." Now let's look at this wife for a moment. The king had great favor of Joseph, and he was blessed in everything. And the wife was observing this most likely. And it said, happened to say here, he was beautiful in form and beautiful in appearance. Potiphar was a eunuch. And there was definitely intimacy that was missing in the marriage with this woman. Not that this is an excuse, but the woman wanted to get her needs met, and Joseph was the pawn here, the victim here, that was going to suffer the consequences if he went along with this plot. And I'm pretty sure this isn't the first time something like this happened. And I'm pretty sure Potiphar knew how his wife was. And but that's, so be it, where they are. And verse 8 says, and he refused. And he refused. Oh, if only Adam would have refused. And he said to his master's wife, "Behold, my master does not know what is in the house with me. And all that he owns, he has given into my hand. No one in this house is greater than I. And he has not withheld anything from me except you, because you are his wife. And how should I do this great evil and sin against Elohim?" Wow. If only Adam would have said that to Eve. But this woman wasn't giving up. And it happened. As she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her. To lie beside her, to be with her. And this is a great example of how men to act. Now, the best thing is not even to be in the presence of a woman like this, but because we see here in Proverbs where it says the naive man will walk past a woman with her sly looks and her sweet words, and will walk and go to her like the animal going to slaughter. And Joseph wasn't about to fall into that trap. He might not have had a choice not to be around her because they were both in the house together. But it says he did not listen to her. So men, I recommend you not even being in the presence of a woman like this, but if you must, do not listen to her. And it says, and it happened on this day, this is verse 11, he went into the house to do his work. He was going there to do his work. And none of the men of the house were there in the house. Now, this woman shows the nature of certain women that are being led by Satan, the enemy. This must have been a big house with a lot of servants, but somehow, some way, the house was empty this day. And who do you think made the house empty that day? The woman probably gave everyone off and told everyone to stay out of the house that day. And here comes poor innocent Joseph into the house. It says she caught him by his robe, saying, "Lie with me." And now he had to react and respond. And he left his robe in a hand and fled and went outside. Now, some people said he might have been naked, completely naked. Some people said maybe there was an undergarment under his robe. Regardless, is he running in his underwear or running naked? He fled from her. Now she's had it. She was fed up with him denying her. And it happened when she saw that he had left his robe in her hand, and he had fled outside, she called the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, Behold, he has brought to us a Hebrew man to mock us. He came to me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. Now, you see the true nature of this woman who despised her husband, and disgraced her husband by saying, Behold, he has brought to us a Hebrew man to mock at us. She's literally blaming her husband in front of the men of the house. When she says he brought a Hebrew man to us, she's blaming her husband in front of the man. The man who was supposed to be her husband, who she was supposed to serve, who she was supposed to hold at the highest esteem. She was disgracing him. He brought a Hebrew into the man to this house to mock at us. And he came to me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. This woman was a liar. She was evil. And verse 15, and when it happened, he heard that I raised my voice, and he cried, and raised my voice, and I cried, and he left his robe by me, and fled, and went outside. And she kept his robe beside her until the coming of his master to the house. And she spoke these same words to him, saying, the Hebrew slave who you brought. So now she's saying to his face, who you brought into this house, came to mock at me. Who you brought. And it happened at my raising my voice and crying, he left his robe beside me and fled outside. And it happened when his master heard the wife's word which she spoke to him, saying, according to these words your slave did to me, his anger glowed. Like as I was saying, this is probably not the first time something like this had happened. I think Potiphar was on to understanding what had happened here, but the way that his wife worded it, even though he probably didn't believe her. And it happened when his master heard his wife's words, which she spoke to him, saying, according to the words of your slave did to me, his anger glowed. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison house, the place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison house. Now, why do I think that this happened before? And why do I think that Potiphar didn't believe his wife? Because if this truly was the case and he truly believed his wife, even though Joseph had favor in his eyes, this man was the chief of the executioners. He could have had Joseph killed in a moment. At a moment. It appears his anger wasn't towards Joseph as much as if he was truly a man, he would have kept Joseph in the house and had his wife executed or sent her away. But here he was, not left much more with the position because she had already complained to all the men of the house. What's he going to do? He could have killed him, but he didn't. He sent him to the prison house. Now, somebody might say, where's Yahweh's hand on our lives if things aren't going great? Things weren't going great for innocent Joseph at this time. He did not do anything wrong. And here he is sitting in a prison house. Once again, getting everything stripped away. In a prison dungeon. It appeared things weren't going right, but Yahweh had a plan. Yahweh had a plan. And somehow, some way, Yahweh wanted to keep him there to fulfill this plan. If this man would have set Joseph free to go wherever he wanted, he probably went right back to his brothers and right back to his father. But Yahweh had to find a way to keep him there. And Joseph was gaining so much freedom that he might have been able to freely leave anyway. But now he's not going anywhere. Yahweh's keeping him there for something bigger. And if something's going on in your life, I want to encourage you right now. You might want to be done with something. You might want something to be over, but Yahweh might not be ready for that to be over. Yahweh might have bigger plans for your situation. So remember that and stay encouraged. Verse 22. And the warden of the prison house gave all the prisoners in the prison house to Joseph's hand, and all which they did there he was doing. So just like just like Joseph gained great favor with Potiphar and serving him, it's the same thing here. I don't know if Potiphar spoke to the prison guard, the warden, and told him how the truth of the situation, that he's probably not guilty. He's blessed me, treat him the right way. Or if this warden mentioned it or realized it on his own. But I'm sure the warden saw just as well, just as Potiphar did, that Yahweh was with Joseph. Yes, Yahweh was with Joseph. How can Yahweh be with Joseph if all these things can be happening to him, sold into slavery, in a dungeon, falsely accused, sold by his own people? Well, who else in the scriptures does that sound like? Somebody accused, sold by his own people, accused, and worse than a prison house, put to death. There's so many areas that the life of Joseph mimics this life of Yahshua. But we remember this one thing: Yahweh was with him. Yahweh was with him. In verse 23, there was no looking of the warden of the prison house to anything in his hand, in that Yahweh was with him, and Yahweh was prospering what he was doing. The fruit was with Joseph, no matter where Joseph was. Yahweh was with him, and Yahweh was prospering what he was doing. Joseph wasn't complaining about the situation. Joseph was serving the way he should serve. Yahshua didn't complain about the situation. He was serving the way Yahweh wanted him to serve. Hallelujah. This is chapter 39 of the book of Genesis. And then we're going to get into the last book of this week's teaching, which is going to be chapter 40, coming up next. And we're going to see all these things happening and about the dream coming up, and how Joseph, some big things are about to happen to him, and Yahweh's put there Joseph there and keeping him there for a reason. So we want to remember this. We want to remember of the example Joseph is setting as a suffering servant here. And we're going to look at the cupbearer and the baker, and we're going to look at the bread and the wine in the next chapter, and how these are symbols of Yeshua as a type of Messiah, and has so much in common with the Messiah. We're going to look at that in the next chapter. Thank you all for being here. Thank you here for being here this day and reading along with me. The consistency of reading the word and praying to Yahweh has such an impact on our lives. And it says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Resist the enemy and he will flee from you. When you're doing Yahweh's work, when you're reading Yahweh's word, when you're spending time with Yahweh, there's no time for the enemy will flee. Hallelujah. But he's going to come back. That's why you must prepare and build yourself up. You all have a blessed day. Yahweh be with you this day and always. Thank you for watching. Please share this with others. And shalom, shalom.